Okay, puppet peeps, I've got your mission for today. I know there's been a lot of snow and a lot of obstacles, but we're still in good shape. Do not despair, puppets will get made. And today I'm going to have you do some mock-up arms while I'm not there. There were some questions about it, so I'm putting this video tutorial together so that you can follow it. 11 arms by tonight would be amazing. Let's go for it. First thing up is making new hand patterns. Since the original ones were a little too big, I took them down to 85%. We're still going to use the original arm, so what I did is made copies of the original arm and then 85% copies of the new hand. So today, first thing to do is to marry and cheat these two together, like so. So I'm leaving you an example. If you could do the other 4, so there's one for each team, that's how to start. So then you end up with a pattern like this. And today I'd like you to make 11 mock-up arms so that we have something to work with in rehearsal while we're making the arms we're actually going to use. And this will help us determine if we've made the correct length arms in rehearsal for the puppeteers. So we're going to do this out of muslin, which I'm going to leave for you also with the patterns. And this is how you sew the arms. You're each going to take a long strip of muslin that's wide enough with plenty of extra for the arm, and you're going to fold it over so that you have 2 pieces together. And then you're going to take your pattern and you're going to lay it down flat, and then you're going to pin that pattern onto your muslin. Just enough so that you can get it an accurate trace without the pattern shifting around. You do this by continuing to flatten and flatten and flatten until you have your pattern pinned like this. So we're not going to bother in the beginning cutting around this pattern. How we're going to do it this time, which is a little different than regular sewing, is for you to take your Sharpie marker and trace directly onto the fabric right where the pattern lies. So you're going to get an exact trace of the hand onto the muslin, which means you're tracing right up against this black line. Okay, so now we have the pattern is traced onto the muslin, like so. And also a reminder on the patterns, we're still doing a little extra. We're drawing extra onto the fabric beyond the pattern, since we're not quite sure how long we want these arms yet, and they're probably going to vary puppet to puppet. So here we have pattern traced onto 2 pieces of muslin folded together. And now we're going to sew directly on that line. That is the actual seam. Don't worry about seam allowances yet, just sew it like this in a rectangle. Okay, so now you're going to machine sew right onto that black line and try to be as exact as possible. This is a great place to practice before we get to the original or the actual fleece that we're going to use. And take your time going around the curves of the finger. You can even use the wheel of the sewing machine instead of the pedal to go very, very slow and go stitch by stitch if you're having trouble making that curve. And the way you do that is by lifting the arm just a little bit, the foot, and then sewing a little bit more. So just stitch by stitch, take it easy. It should be a somewhat small stitch so it doesn't pull out. So when you get to the pinky finger, just sew to the very end of the pinky finger and then do a back stitch, and then you're going to leave open this side here about 4 inches, and that's where we're going to insert the hand plate later. So leave this section open and then continue sewing down the arm, and then also leaving open the very, very end, which is where we're going to attach it to the puppet. Now we have this sewn. right on the line, and we're going to cut it out. So cut out about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, so that means cutting 1/4 of an inch right outside the line where you sewed. And I'm going to leave this for you guys as an example, and I did this in a real big hurry with a very sloppy stitch that's too big, so please do a better job than I did. And just be really careful when you get in between the fingers, of course. They're pretty close together, so you probably don't need to take any fabric out. Just make the cut down to the middle of the finger, as close as you can get. And there should be a nice tight stitch in there so that we don't have to worry about it splitting beyond. The hand and arm is sewn and cut, and now we're going to turn it inside out. Probably easiest to use that little side opening that you left, because that's closest to the fingers. So try to get them turned all the way inside out, using a pencil if you need to push out these curves. Okay, so the other new thing we have today are resized hand plates and foam patterns to go along with the new arm size, also at 85%. So I've left 4 of these for you to also cut out. We're not going to do the hands on these mock-ups exactly the same way that we'll be doing them on the original puppets. We're not going to use up foam in this case, but we are going to use hand plates, but we're going to use the thinnest that I've left there, up above the cubbies. So let's use some thin stuff so it's super easy to cut out. And then you're going to trace your hand plate onto them. And we're doing 11 hands, or 11 arms, so that each of the puppets have at least one mock-up. We'll get to the others later for the puppets that have 2 arms. So just trace this guy and do a better job than me onto this hand plate. And then cut that out. And you should be able to use scissors, so it's easy. Okay, next we're going to cut out an arm rod out of a hanger. And those of you who were in my puppet class last semester have done this before. So you know how tricky it is. So use your wire cutters. And cut the wire hanger loop off, and being very careful, just straighten this guy out as best as you can. It's not going to be perfect, but use your wire cutter pliers to kind of straighten out those bumps. Okay, after you have your rod straight, you're going to do a 90-degree turn on the top, leaving about 2 inches. Might be best to do that turn when you have a little bit of extra length, because it's easier to do it with a longer piece, and then cut down to size so that we can put the rod onto the hand plate. So now we're going to put the arm rod onto the hand plate, and if you look in the instruction section of your binder, you'll see that there are instructions for how to place this. When you're looking at your hand plate, there's a very definitive thumb side. We want the rod to be coming off on the pinky side, because when you have your hands, naturally, like the puppet will, thumb always points upward, so the rod is going to come out below. So it's actually going to be coming out from the wrist. So I'll be leaving this example so you can see, but also find these instructions, as I said, in the binder if there's any confusion. And the epoxy that we got did not hold at all, so we're going to try using, just for this mock-up, some hot glue to get it on there initially. So make a nice little, or a big wad of hot glue, being careful maybe using another utensil. These are low heat, so they're not that burning, but to press it down. And then after that's down nice and tight, we're going to cover it up with a nice piece of gaffer's tape, because that does everything. Always extra security is the gaffer's tape. So then you end up with hand plate and rod like this. Okay, so now we're going to stuff, since we're not doing foam, we're going to stuff with the batting that I left you. Very, very lightly. This should be soft. It doesn't need to be firm at all, but we just want to put a little bit of form into each finger. So take a little bit of batting and very lightly kind of squeeze it into the fingers. And again, I'm doing this in a hurry because I need to put this video together for you guys, so please do a better job than what I'm doing. And because I didn't backstitch, I just ripped into that finger. So definitely backstitch even on seams that are going to be eventually closed. So after you have the fingers stuffed, you're going to take your hand plate and insert it with the thumb side towards the thumb and just put it right there, slide it into the palm. So you end up with something like this. And then just put a little bit of batting again around that hand plate to puff it out to make it look like a hand. And then you're going to use the batting also to very, very lightly fill up this arm. And it should be so lightly stuffed that it's able to be pliable still. And then you're all going to practice your hand stitching skills by stitching up the seam right here along the pinky side of the hand. And then just leave a little bit of an opening, or really stitch around this rod right here. So now we are hand stitching up the side that we had left open. So remember that there was about 1/4 of an inch of a seam allowance, which means you want to turn 1/4 of an inch of the edge under on both sides before bringing them together. And I'm using black thread so that you can see more easily what I'm doing. Of course, it's always good to use matching thread with your fabric. So we're just doing a whip stitch. This is a great place for you to practice. It's good to have consistent, very small stitches, and it's slow going at first to get into that rhythm, but take your time on this project so you can practice, because in some of these places the hand stitching is going to be very important that it doesn't show. So just take your time and sew that up. This is just a reminder about the binder that I left for you guys in the cubby over the sewing machines. This is the go-to place for any questions you have if you can't get a hold of me. There's a section of instructions for every step of the puppet. Some we haven't gotten to yet, but actually if any of you are waiting for a tool or have some downtime, please, please, everybody should be reading this entire section. This has so much information, and I chose this company, projectpuppet.com, because they are made for new puppeteers and new puppet builders. So they really lead you through every step. And also their website has even more information, projectpuppet.com. Please do use it. And also all of the patterns that hopefully somebody downloaded last night and printed have their own instructions, which have even more information. So use this great resource. Any patterns that you cut today should go back into the associated folder in the binder that Michelle and some other people helped make. So let's keep them all together so we can find them again.